Multicultural education is
Multicultural education is
Multicultural education is taking into consideration the variety of different experiences students have coming into the classroom and applying that understanding and trying to meet the individual needs of all of your students.
So my name is Rose Brooks. I use they, them, their gender neutral pronouns. I am a first year graduate student in the Higher Education Administration program and the graduate assistant in the Center for Sexuality and Gender Diversity. I'm originally from St. Louis, Missouri, and I did 3 years of my undergrad at the University of Missouri, Kansas City in Kansas City, Missouri. Reflect a lot on my K through 12 experience, which is why I think I'm having some interesting thoughts right now about how I really navigated through K through 12. I was bullied a lot. I couldn't really maybe pinpoint right off this moment of maybe what some identity markers may have been that would have resulted in the bullying that I went through, and most of that was in elementary school. Middle school was okay. High school was interesting. I got involved in stuff that was really what I wanted to be doing. So I was in like 5 choirs my senior year of high school. I was in theater. I was doing plays and stuff. So I found senses of community that were comfortable for me and started kind of navigating some sexuality stuff, some gender stuff, just kind of like being kind of off the grid in terms of social status in high school. So definitely finding those pockets of community were very helpful, so I didn't really have to think about certain identity things because everyone was really welcoming and everything was comfortable. But definitely elementary school was difficult, but at that point it wasn't really for a lot of specific things. A lot of it was size related. I was a person of size from birth pretty much. So that was some of the navigation, and just high school was okay, I think. I would say that based on the socio-political landscape right now of kind of some of these racial injustice issues, that I've had to pay a lot of attention to my whiteness and reflecting on what space I take up in the classroom, what space I take up in conversations on campus regarding racial justice issues. So I would very much say that that's led me to understand and fully believe that there is some educational gaps between people of color and their access to education and their ability to be successful versus white people or non-dominant dominant racial classes. So that very much goes into all facets of education. So I think it's very clear that with certain racial minorities, advising looks very different. It might be an hour required to really navigate some conversations because it might not just be academics that's causing that student to be unsuccessful in the classroom versus the half hour that maybe undergraduate advising usually sanctions off for having conversations about academics. So there's just a lot of things that we're probably not focusing on very well to make sure that students are successful, especially if they're a student of color, because with being a student of color, that definitely comes with class-related issues, socioeconomic status issues, just navigating a lot of personal life at the same time. So we talk a lot about challenge and support in my program for higher education, and sometimes I think that certain minority groups, whether it's racial, whether it's sexuality, whether it's gender, need maybe a little bit less of the challenge and a lot more of the support, or a different kind of support, because they're already very much dealing with the challenges. And sometimes I think that we collectively and holistically take an approach of the same type of challenge and the same type of support for all students. And that doesn't really, in my mind, work for some of our marginalized students.
And my name is Marcia Carrasco Cooper, and I am an assistant director for the Student Involvement and Leadership Center, and I work primarily with leadership programs. So I think socioeconomic status affected my education for sure, in that our school, the school that I went to, is primarily white and middle class, and I'm from South America. I'm Bolivian. My parents are Bolivian, so they did their very best to provide me with everything that they could. And what that looked like was that my mom worked 2 jobs, and my dad worked 1. But they were year everybody had the latest trend and all of the brand names, and they were working very hard to give me this life that they wanted me to have. And my peers, they had this life, but it didn't seem like their life was anything like mine. And that manifested itself at school with material things. So when it came time for people to start driving and getting cars, that was a thing. Everybody turned 16 and got new cars, and that was definitely not a reality that I could have had. And it was interesting because for whatever reason it made it feel like that mattered, and I remember focusing a lot on that while in school. So I can't imagine what life would have felt like if that wasn't something that I ever noticed or ever felt like I was left out of. I also didn't recognize that we were different in any other way. I just thought my parents worked hard and they, had to work a little extra hard to make money. I didn't ever really think, oh, we're from Bolivia and that makes us different. That wasn't a connection that I ever made. I think it's hard because it makes you really face the reality. And the reality is, yes, I think that there is an educational gap between students of color and white students. And so my gender is apparently a big thing, and I didn't know it for a really long time. I spent the majority of my formative years, K through 12, not really thinking about how I was different as any sort of identity marker, but specifically gender. I was I'm not a feminist, but don't treat me differently, I'm just like you. And then I took a women's studies class in college, and we did a lot of reading, and I realized how very masculine the world around me was. I started paying attention to things like, do we not notice it? And the answer is no, like we don't notice those things. So then it was very interesting in moving up professionally and being in leadership positions. I've had to adapt to this, and I don't want to say androgynous because I really do think it's more masculine, but I've had to become this different person when I'm presenting or when I'm doing something professionally. And if I really look into that or dissect that a little bit, it's really taking out a lot of those gender stereotypes that people don't react well to, taking out some sensitivity, taking out some insecurity maybe that comes with ways I've learned and things I've been taught, ways to dress, things like that, I think are all because everything in the world is gendered.
Mm-hmm.